you. Hello. Yeah, the thing about an afternoon slot is you get to sit back and watch a lot of really talented people talk about all the stuff you were going to talk about and do a far better job of it than you could hope to. But hopefully, I think, yeah, but that's a good thing. I mean, it's good because it means that I guess we're all doing something right if we all agree in this. So hopefully I can give you, a unique take on how we're doing things and how we hope to do things at Just Eat. So yeah, just a bit of an introduction. I used to be a developer, then I moved into security. I'm now a security engineer on the security team at Just Eat. Just give you the context on the security team. There's about 6 permanent members. At Just Eat, we have over 100 developers, a lot more than 100 developers actually, in the region of 30 to 50 unique features. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of change. Of the 6 members of the security team, one is leadership. We have 2 in ops, and there's 3 of us who kind of focus more on AppSec. Up until a month ago, there was 1 of us who concentrated on AppSec. So I think it's a challenge a lot of people face in organizations where you have quite a small security team and you have a lot of developers and you have a lot of change happening and a lot of features. So I think it's a common challenge for all of us here. So yeah, I've done a lot. I've been an engineer for a while, and I've worked in an environment where we had Waterfall, where you get this mythical week-long security review at the end of just before a release. To fortnightly, not bi-weekly, fortnightly sprints, and now, at Just Eat, we do a lot of continuous delivery. We like to be able to react quickly to the market to get stuff out there. Get stuff out there quick. We like to be fast. And I found 2 things along the way. The first one, application security, is either a bottleneck in security or is perceived as, a bottleneck in the deployment process, or is perceived as a bottleneck in the deployment process. And it's essentially the same thing. And the other thing I've discovered is that security isn't anything special. I mean, I'm kidding somewhat. We are all very special. We're all unicorns. But specifically the part of application security, which is finding flaws in software, that's not anything special. People have been doing this for a long time. It's bugs. It's flaws in code. So let's look at how people have been doing that, and see if we can use those techniques to find security issues. A couple of definitions. I think possibly everyone knows these already. This is my kind of go-to definition for continuous delivery. As a feature is always in a releasable state and production ready. So you may not push every change to production, but you certainly have a releasable artifact that could go to production at any point. And that's achieved through short development cycles, automated deployment pipeline, and of course continuous integration. And perhaps the next step will be, as I mentioned, continuous deployment, where every change goes straight out the door to production. What do InfoSec do? Lots. One of the things we do is we have to provide assurance that we're only pushing secure software to production. We do that for a number of reasons. It could be regulation, it could be compliance. We want to protect our customer data, and we don't want to get hacked because that just doesn't look good for us. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, if you've just started somewhere, which was my experience, there's no security team there. There's so much change happening. There's so many deployments happening all the time. How the hell do you stay on top of it? And initially, yeah, it was a bit of panic. Like, I don't know how I'm really going to do this. There's only one of me, but there's all this stuff happening. And how do you govern that as security? So there's a number of ways you can govern change within an organization. This is one. I don't know if anyone I'm not going to badmouth change advisory boards. They definitely have their place, and I've worked at places that do change advisory boards. If anyone hasn't been involved in these, what usually happens is you have a board of people that will decide what can change. So people will have a list of proposed changes. You will stand in a room as representing security, and people will say, security, have you reviewed this change? Have you reviewed this change? Can it go out? And that definitely, there's a place for that, and in some places that works. But in an environment where you have to react quickly and you're putting out, you can't wait the next day to release a change. It doesn't really fit that kind of model. So the alternative, if you are doing continuous delivery, and just to say, if you are doing change advisory boards, so you are doing next day change, this still works because this is just the stuff that happens beforehand. It doesn't really matter how the code goes out there. So I'll talk about early engagement and tools and reporting. So yeah, I mean, early engagement, don't be late to the party. 2 questions you need to ask yourself. First one, are security part of the feature design? When at inception point of software, are you doing threat modeling? The next question you need to ask yourself is, do you need to? Is that actually necessary? Is that a good use of your time? Do you have the time to do that? Like, you might be spreading yourself far too thin to do a review of every single change that's happening and feed in requirements to every change and do that threat modeling. It doesn't always work. So maybe instead of doing the threat modeling and then giving the dev teams a bunch of requirements that they have to do, let's give them the training, tools, resources they need to do it themselves. Let's outsource that to dev teams, to architects, so it doesn't necessarily have to sit within security. It's a process, and anyone can follow a process. You need the training. And then, security can absolutely be a part of that, but you don't have to sit in every threat modeling session, or you don't have to feed in requirements. So it's less requirements and more guidelines. And this can lead into, you can have security stories within a project, and your requirements, the security requirements that came out of the threat modeling, those who can become acceptance criteria, which I'll talk about. Now, let's be realistic. That's the utopian situation where everyone writes really good code and no one makes any mistakes, and no one's going to make a change that impacts security in a negative way. Stuff will happen, and you still need the visibility over what's going on. So we use Jira at Just Eat. I think a lot of people do, and so we built a bot called Marvin. Don't panic, Marvin. You're probably seeing a bit of a Douglas Adams theme here. So what Marvin does is Marvin looks at the Jira API and it does a keyword search for security relevant terms, say encryption, password, and a lot more, that kind of stuff. And when it finds an issue, it adds itself as a watcher. There's a Marvin user, so now Marvin is now watching this. Great, you have the visibility. So let's go a step further, and it leaves a little comment on there saying you're being watched. After a bit of feedback, because feedback's important, the message has now changed from you are being watched, because that doesn't help with this image of Big Brother security watching everything you do. So it's far more friendly. What we're actually saying is, this contains a security relevant keyword. We'd love for you to come talk to us. Please come talk to us. We're lonely. We like people. And it opens up that chain of communication between you and the development teams, which is absolutely crucial. And it's really good to make yourself known like that. So we're still working on it. We're going to improve the feedback. So there's going to be false positives. Let people feedback, and then that'll improve the search filters and so on. And it just gives you that visibility, which is so vital. And as I said, this is again, it's this idea of security not being ivory tower security, who sit up there and just before production give you a whole load of stuff that their static analysis scanner found, and you have to go fix it, and it's all false positives, and security don't understand that. So instead, security should, let's give the developers, QA architects, let's give them the tools they need to do that. So let's do this test and trust and verify approach, that we provide the tooling, we look at the output of that tooling, but it's the developers and the engineering teams that are in charge of the security tooling. They're in charge of running it against their products, and it goes into their pipeline. And of course, I think Renato mentioned security champions. It's again something I'm a big fan of. And So, if you want, so you can put security champions within teams and they become the go-to people for security within your engineering teams. And you can provide training. Now, when I say training, I don't mean secure coding training. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you had to do secure coding training, where it's that stuff that you have to do to check the PCI box, where you have to watch a bunch of videos about code. Instead, I mean, teach people how to hack. That's much more fun. Get people in a room, give them burp or zap or whatever, and do some man in the middle on a mobile device and let them see what's happening and get them to hack some vulnerable applications. It's a lot more interesting and you'll get a lot out of that. And that's how you make your security champions. That's how you get people incentivized, and you can put those within the security teams, and they can be the people you go to about those tools, guidelines, standards. Another approach, and one we've taken at Just Eat, is we've now hired two very talented software engineers. I have to say that because they're in the room, and they will be security software engineers. So they'll work within teams and they'll write features, and but they'll also be the go-to people for security. So they'll write the features, they'll write them well with security in mind, but then they can also do the kind of security overall improvement work as well. So this is broadly what our deployment pipeline looks at Just Eat. So what's a deployment pipeline? It's the only way you can get your stuff to production. The pipeline is basically orchestrating the continuous integration. So everything starts with a commit, then we do our build, our unit tests, put stuff on QA, and that's where we do all our functional testing and so on. You see there's an authorized step there. That's because we're not doing continuous deployment yet. We're doing continuous delivery. So that will create a releasable artifact, then it actually runs a manual step of someone going in and authorizing it, and it goes out to production. So this is where and this is great because it means that there's only one way to get to production, and now we know we're only putting tested, proven software in production. So this is the obvious place we should start checking for security in this thing here. People have spoken about these already, so I don't think I need to. Static analysis looks at the code. Dynamic analysis, it looks at the outside. Now, I'll come back to that. So there's a couple of things about our SAST and DAST which people mentioned is they're slow. They're not that fast because they do a complex job, and DAST is slow because it has to fuzz so much, and SAST is it's quite complex static analysis. So a challenge you might face is we have a 10-minute pipeline, a 20-minute pipeline that's now a 4-hour pipeline because security have messed with it. And okay, great, that might be that. Maybe that's just how it has to be to make sure you're putting the secure code out there. If if the business where you work says, okay, I'm fine with that, you're very lucky, and that's really good. It doesn't always work like that. So perhaps what you might have to consider is doing your own security builds. And I think, again, Renato mentioned this as well, where you have like a security build, and that can trigger at the same time, but it takes a bit longer. Now, if that security build fails, perhaps in the original development builds, they can check the status of that security build, and if that's failed, stop. No more releases. Maybe even if you've done a release, roll back to the previous version before these vulnerabilities were introduced. Yeah, that means we put some vulnerability code on production for a while. That's not good. So there's a risk there, but it's a quantifiable risk. There's a time difference between when the two builds completed, it's quantifiable risk. And the good thing about quantifiable risks is you can get someone to sign off on it. You can make people aware of it. It's not ideal. Ideal is the previous situation where you have blocking security steps in your pipeline, but let's be realistic. That's not always going to be the case. And it's all about your own organization's attitude to risk and what's more important to them. So functional security testing. So this is what I'm talking about, where we should use how people have already been testing for code quality, but software quality, but test for security software quality. So as a few people, I think Marcus mentioned this morning, dynamic analysis and static analysis aren't going to find a business logic issue. That's what pen tests find. Now, but what is that? That, when, say for the example of a broken login form. So this is where if I log in with an incorrect password, I still get in. That's, that's not good. But what that is that's a breakdown because it's not, the software has not been designed or built to requirements. So this is where we're going back to the beginning, where we engaged early, or the teams did their threat modeling, and out of that came a set of requirements or acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria says that when I try and log in with an incorrect password, I should get an error. So if we can test for that automatically before it goes to production, then this wouldn't happen. So it's a way, so these business logic issues, they can be tested automatically. Not all of them can, but you can get coverage of your business logic issues by automated testing. They've already got a lot of mentions already. BDD-Security Continuum Security do a very good framework for this, BDD-Security, which I'll show a screenshot next, and of course Selenium, which is what a lot of this functional testing is based on. It's a screen from a scenario as an example of BDD-Security. So what they're doing here is they're testing for SQL injection as a scenario. So this is going to be the scenario in the documented test. So this is the documented test and now being kept as code. So that's good, and we can now track we can set the level we want to test at, the attack threshold, log false positives here. What this is actually does, which is quite interesting, is it's using ZAP. And I think there was a workshop earlier on, or maybe it's on later on, I think at 4 o'clock. Yeah, so there's one about automating ZAP, because you can actually run ZAP in headless mode, and an API hangs off it, and you can send commands to it, and it becomes your dynamic application scanner, and you can tell it what endpoints to scan and how to scan them. So that can be part of your test framework. Much simpler scenario here, which is where, as described, you have a business logic issue where this is our classic. There's a password reset link. If someone clicks on it once, they shouldn't be able to click on it again. So let's write a scenario. So we're saying, given the customer's done something, they've clicked the password reset link. When I navigate to the password reset link, I should see an error response code. So just to go back, what we had before and what we used to do in security is we used to write requirements document or requirement stories. Instead of that, now we're writing test scenarios. So our requirements are now tests. So even now, let's turn these into code. So we can do that manually, or we can use a parser to run as part of a test suite. So there's I don't know if anyone's heard, I think it's quite well known, the Cucumber test framework has a really good parser, a Gherkin parser, which will take these given when then scenarios and turn them into functional tests. So what you'll see is something like this, where you have your test steps, and in there you're going to have some code which will spin up a browser automation framework, Selenium perhaps, and actually go through the steps. And if it doesn't see the response code you're expecting, if it sees a 200 response code when you clicked on that link you shouldn't be able to click on, then the test fails, the build stops, and you have to fix it. And another good use for this kind of testing is regression testing, which someone mentioned earlier, because say if you have a pen test and the pen test finds a cross-site scripting issue, and your devs go and they check in the fix. Instead of just checking in the fix, check in the fix and a regression test, because now this cross-site scripting seems to regress a lot. Actually, that seems to happen. So it's a good, and so now you have that regression test in there. So if someone reintroduces the bug somehow, your tests are going to start failing in your pipeline, and stuff doesn't go out to production. So here's our pipeline again. So what have we done? We put our static analysis, a dynamic analysis, and a functional test. So now security, hopefully is part of the pipeline. Or as I said, security could be its own pipeline, which is okay. Right, so metrics and reporting. So yeah, this is very important because you're doing all this great stuff, and you're doing all these great stuff, but no one knows about it. So the thing about security, one of our challenges is we don't make the business very much money. We don't generate revenue. I said we don't increase conversion. That's not necessarily true. If you're writing good, secure software, actually that does, good and secure applications, that does attract customers, and you are actually improving your stuff for customers. But anyway, so what we want to show is we want to show improvements in closed vulnerabilities or bugs. So we're showing improvements. So what's nice if you have a graph that shows, the number of closed vulnerabilities. Even better, have a graph which shows the number of discovered vulnerabilities and then the number of closed. So what your chart should look like is you have the line going up like this when you establish your baseline, and then, now you're closing them off. Because discovered vulnerability, it's actually a good thing. It's showing that you have good coverage. And that's what should start happening as you start putting in this tooling and you start testing. You're increasing your visibility, you're increasing coverage. There's no more unknowns. You have lots of knowns. You have lots of known bugs, but that's much better than when they were hidden and you didn't know about these issues. This is a fun thing to do, is to publicize when you're being attacked, because you're being attacked all the time. If you run a medium to large or even a small online platform, people are always going to be trying to have a go at it. I love showing people the blocks on our web application firewall, because people don't realize it's happening all the time. People are always, and it's script kiddies. It most of the time it's not effective, but it just goes to show you there is this constant level of attack. So put it on a dashboard, put it on a big screen, and if you want to have a world map that shows attacks with little pew noises, like the Norse DDoS graph, and it'll, it's a really good way of getting people interested, because people may not be aware that they think security is something special, we're just doing it for compliance, but then they don't realize this is a challenge and just how big the challenge is. So I think someone asked earlier, how do you incentivize security champions? How do you incentivize developers to write secure software? I don't think you need to, because maybe I've just had the privilege of working with very good engineers, but we're proud of what we make, and we want to make good stuff. We want to make really good stuff. So you're incentivized because you want to make the best code and you want to make the most secure code. So how you can incentivize that further is start publicizing who has the most secure code. So you have all these great metrics. You have all these metrics about coverage and security coverage and security issues found and closed and so on. So let's make a league table or a dashboard of who's the best team, who's writing the most secure code. And I guarantee you that'll get people motivated. And which is good. It's a good thing, because we're a lot of people in technology, we're all quite competitive. We want to be making the best stuff, even in internal, and it's not spreading discord or anything like that, but it does get people motivated and it gets people incentivized. Important to highlight the best, not the worst. Don't do a league table of people that have broken the build the most times. That's not going to make you any friends. So who's doing the best, and you could use this to promote training. Maybe you could, I see you've had introduced a lot of new vulnerabilities. Let's talk about training. Would you be interested in doing a workshop? And it fits with, we're at Just Eat, we embrace DevOps. One particular aspect we embrace is autonomy. So if you're in a team, you own everything in terms of how your code gets to production. Now there's teams that they provide this, platform as a service, they provide the pipelines, they provide all that good stuff. But in terms of how you use it and what you do, you own it. And this is good because it promotes that. It promotes those teams' ownership of their code, ownership of their software. They want to write the best stuff. Yeah, so this always seems to come up whenever I talk about continuous delivery and how we do security, especially when I'm talking to our PCI QSA. Because he says, but what about segregation of duties? You can't let developers have access to production. The world will end. If developers have access to production, it'd be a disaster. They have no idea what they're doing, apparently. So, that's not true. And first of all, in the scenario I described, we're not giving anyone access to production. We're giving people access to a pipeline. This is actually a much better scenario for security. So, because now what that means is anything that goes from code to production has to go through the same set of checks. It has to use the pipeline. So that's a really good thing. That means that whereas before we were in a scenario where there are lots of different ways you could get to production, and maybe the pipeline could be bypassed, and security could be bypassed, because security is now an inherent part of this software delivery pipeline, that's actually a much better situation. So that's the way you sell this. What also helps is if you have your pipeline, it adds accountability because you know who made the change that goes to production, and you can add access control into that and all that good stuff. So that's the thing. When I started with continuous delivery, I thought this is terrifying because it means that there's going to be all this change happening and we have no control over it. But eventually came to the realization that if you have everyone's putting stuff to production and changes are happening all the time, but it's happening in a static way. It's all going through the pipeline. And if you can control that, and if you can make security a part of that, you're going to be in a good place. So that's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff, and as I said, there's a lot of small security teams. So where do you start? Perhaps you're doing all of that, perhaps you're doing none of that, maybe you're doing a little. So if you're not doing any of that, what I would suggest is just pick one thing and do it right. So for example, automate one thing. Automate get a functional test, automate it. Use the BDD-Security framework. It's free, ZAP, it's free. You can do that. So perhaps there's no continuous integration at your organization. So start it. That's great. Security are now driving continuous integration. And you perhaps talk to your QA guys because they might already have a test framework that they're using. They know a lot of this stuff already. So if maybe they're doing a lot of this and you can piggyback on what they're doing. And one last tip is to measure and build a baseline, because you can't measure improvement until you know what the current situation is. And yeah, that's it. So does anyone have any questions? I think there's one at the back over there. Someone over there had a hand up. Yeah. Oh. I can hear you.
So you introduced Marvin, right? And you spoke a lot about measure. After you introduced Marvin, since you were talking about measuring, I was kind of curious, and this might be a naughty question, but did you find any difference in how developers raised the tickets in Jira? Did you find that they actually, perhaps, and it can go both ways. Maybe they actually tagged security keywords to get your attention and opinion. Maybe they altered their vocabulary. Did you track any of that?
So what we found in that, and just to add, I mean, it is definitely in its early stages at the moment, but talking to developers, I think what we found is they might be more likely to label security. People aren't going to try and get around this, hopefully, because if you have, it just means that it just allows you to start the conversation with security early instead of having the conversations with security later on when it's gone to production and you've done a pen test and they found a really bad issue because you didn't start that early conversation. So Yes, of course, it can be bypassed. You could stop using the security keyword, definitely. But I suppose you have to take this kind of trust and verify approach to avoid those situations.
I was just curious if you're tracking how you're altering their behavior through this. It's a type of A/B testing. You're introducing a new style of culture and so on.
Yeah.
And the question is, how is that shifting it? How is that you're shifting your developers' behavior?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to do, and I'll be honest, like we don't have the sample size to do kind of A/B testing around that, but it would be very interesting to do because at that, and you're absolutely right. It's all about, you should be able to measure everything because, and that's another thing that we should measure is how this does influence security and how it does improve things. Because how do you know it's doing anything right if you can't measure it? So,
Yep, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So when you talked about training developers to understand security issues like cross-site scripting, have you ever had the situation where you've had to train security specialists on how to use pipelines, on the concept of a pipeline, and how to be certain that the policy they put in place using a pipeline is being put in place? How do you approach that? So
how do we train the kind of the security guys on how to use the pipeline, or how to integrate with the pipeline? Yeah, I mean, I had to train myself on how to use TeamCity, as part of this, and how to use Jenkins and how to use those continuous integration tools. So it's a very key part of it. For other guys on the team, it hasn't been, there's no formal training. It's basically sit down and talk to the guys in the organization that know this, and have those conversations, do a bit of a workshop on how the pipeline works and how continuous integration works and how security can be a part of that. It's again, I think it's, and then, it's this promoting this idea of a two-way conversation between those platform as a service guys that built the pipeline and the engineers and security, rather than security saying, we're going to be part of your pipeline now, put these tools in and sort it out. Because we do that ourselves. We create the build steps because, and so it's good. Yeah, to answer your question, absolutely yes. I think security teams should be completely up to speed on how a pipeline works, just as we would expect developers to be trained up on security.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.